Welcome to the C-Suite, where we are helping women to create choices in their careers. I'm Danielle Deshaw. Our first guest is Dr. Melissa Horne. She is the Director of Client Experience at Dialectic. Dialectic is an organization out of Guelph that really helps to improve leadership and organizational cultures through effective, engaging, and applicable learning experiences. Dr. Horne is going to be talking to us about a product that Dialectic has called Learning Snippets, which is really going to help organization leaders have those conversations that they need to have around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So welcome, Dr. Horne, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, this sounds like it's a tool that really, when we talk about leaders having to have those conversations with their employees around diversity, equity, inclusion, there's always the how. And it sounds like Learning Snippets really helps organizations with that how.
Yeah. So, it's funny that you mentioned leadership. We actually, we created Learning Snippets a number of years back when we were creating a custom leadership program for one of our major clients. And we had combined the Learning Snippets with in-person training and then the snippets, which themselves are delivered via email. We also have an app now as well. But the idea is that we were training new leadership skills. And before leaders actually had to go into one-on-one or coaching sessions with their staff, the Learning Snippets we created were scenarios that allowed the leaders to practice these new skills and behaviors that we were training them on. So, we were doing a lot of unconscious bias training, and we were sort of part of that problem where we were doing one or two events, and then that was it. And so we were introducing all these new concepts and ideas into our training, but there was really no, how do I put this into action? How do I actually, what does it look like to be inclusive? What do these behaviors look like in the workplace? And so what we did was we created learning snippets, DEI learning snippets. So to allow folks to practice these skills in a safe way, right? So the nice thing about being in a scenario is that you have the ability to make mistakes with no real harm or consequences. But when you actually get into those conversations with your team, with your staff, you've already had that practice within the learning snippets. So you have memory, you have this tangible experience that you wouldn't necessarily have had before.
Mm-hmm. And what I know about the learning snippets is they really focus on micro learning. So it's looking at like really kind of taking a big concept and breaking it down into a very short type of training experience. Can you share a little bit more about what micro learning is and why that's being used for the learning snippets?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know a number of things. We take the learning science and we know that, often why we've moved away from sort of these long form e-learning and in-person training sessions is that often people forget, half of what they've learned 60 minutes after, and then the forgetting curve continues on by that. So what we're doing is we're chunking up these core concepts into these 2-minute spurts. And so we use microlearning paired with scenario-based learning. And so we create these highly vivid, really high fidelity scenarios. And we work with all sorts of partners to create these scenarios so that they are as realistic as possible. So we work with folks with lived experience and subject matter experts when we're creating the scenarios. So what happens then is that rather than sort of spending 30 minutes, an hour clicking through modules, you're really focusing short bursts of energy and attention into the learning snippet. And when you have these really high fidelity, highly realistic scenarios, that stuff sticks with you as well. And so we're creating stickiness with the micro learning as well. The other thing that works well in the way that we do scenario-based e-learning is that we use consequential reasoning. So when you, as I mentioned before, you practice. So when you see how a scenario plays out, it mimics the real world. We often know when we've made a mistake or when something's gone really well by the way people respond to us, whether it's some sort of verbal cue or nonverbal cue, or we see how it plays out down the road. So combined, the spaced learning, which we do as well. So we deliver one snippet a week to folks. So the short microlearning, the spaced, and the scenario-based approaches has really improved the way that folks learn and then are able to apply these new skills and inclusive behaviors to the workplace.
Now, with the learning snippets, are they something that you kind of get once and then it goes out of your inbox? Or is it something where if you've done a learning snippet and then you're going into a conversation a few weeks later and you want to go back and review the snippet before you have the conversation, is that possible?
Yeah, so we have an app as well, so you can go back to your email, but we have a whole platform that we developed, and so you can access it on your desktop or laptop or on your phone, tablet. So they're there at the moment if you need a refresher.
Mhm. And what kind of benefits are you seeing really coming out of organizations who are using the learning snippets that you really weren't expecting when you designed them?
Oh boy, that's an interesting question. I think the really, I wouldn't say a benefit. I think what we're seeing is that folks are being able to apply what they've learned to the workplace. Our feedback is saying to us that I'm having these conversations where I wouldn't have before. And we're moving the conversation forward in our organization. And that was our goal, was to create behavior change with the learning snippets.
Mhm. I think it's on your website that says, I think it's like 94% of users of the learning snippets have said that they're more comfortable or better able to handle like a DEI situation.
Absolutely. What we're building here is confidence as well in in being able to use these new skills and behaviors, and that's really important as well. Is that most folks want to be more inclusive, but they're not confident. You know, they lack that. They're worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. But as I mentioned, going through these scenarios and maybe making choosing the wrong or less optimal choice in the scenario and seeing how that plays out makes them more confident um, when they're actually in the real world situation. And that's what we're seeing as well.
Mhm. And are you seeing like kind of organizations using these now in a different way to drive different conversations?
I think what we're seeing is that one, we're it's a really important part of the culture shift and building momentum and excitement and showing the value of why these conversations are important. The other things that we're seeing is that the conversations that are happening, folks are now reflecting on their current policies and practices. So we'll see a discussion around a learning snippet, and folks will say, well, I don't know if we actually have a process or practice that deals with this scenario. And so it's raising and highlighting some gaps that companies have, and they're able to now address them. Because where they weren't having these conversations before, now they are, and so they're able to sort of address these policies and practices in not quite real time, but faster than they would have.
Mhm. And for like anyone who's kind of watching a learning snippet, what would that experience be like?
A learning snippet experience? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's it's funny. There's not a lot behind it other than you have an intro into a scenario, and you're asked essentially, what would you do here? And you have three or four options, and you're able to click on an option, and you'll get instant feedback that says, here's how the situation plays out. Are you happy with your answer, or do you want to pick again? And most folks, will say, well, I'm actually just curious to see if I picked another answer because I'm kind of torn between the two. So they'll pick another answer, and then once they've locked in their answer, another screen comes up that says, "Here's the right answer, or the most optimal way to behave in this situation, or here's the best outcome." And we'd have a "Here's why," and then we have a quick sort of summary around what that actual sort of uh, core theme of the snippet was. So maybe it was around microaggressions, and then we have links out. We have a go deeper section with links often to video, TED talks, publicly accessible resources that allows you to essentially go deeper on this specific topic.
And it sounds like you were talking about earlier the fact that your learning snippets were created based on real scenario and experiences from workplaces. So can you share more about where those scenarios came from and how did you pick which ones to use?
So we often go to the literature first, actually, and so we go and look at, for creating a scenario on inclusive leadership. So we go to what are the models around inclusive leadership? What is the literature saying? And so what we then do is we say, okay, so inclusive leadership, we use the Bork model for ours, and so we say, okay, what are the core themes here? And so we start to build out the program based on that. And then we have writers, and we go to our subject matter experts to say, here are some scenarios that we're thinking about. Tell us what you're seeing in the workplace. And it's an iterative process from there between our writers and our subject matter experts to create these scenarios.
Mhm. So it sounds like there's a lot of collaboration and really going like there's this data, like so the snippets are being based on data, but then there's a collaboration with real world experience so that everything is kind of working together.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if they don't feel realistic, they're not going to have that same sort of impact. People have to see themselves in these scenarios for them to really sort of stick.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Horne, for being here on the show, talking about these learning snippets and really the benefits that they have for organizations who really want to move the conversations forward around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thanks so much, Danielle. I appreciate it.